think of that particular issue, because what it does is polarize the conversation in a very, very wrong way. Okay? But we've seen in Kentucky and other places in the South, and have seen the problems that have befallen the aluminum industry. How much of that is real? How much of that is simply the price of aluminum around the world? I don't know, but nevertheless, it is a place where we had to deal in the last legislative session. We didn't, the legislature did, of what is the trade-off between those jobs of the aluminum industry versus the ratepayers, the individual ratepayers, who are who really are a minority user of the electricity. The plant that was under consideration there was built specifically for the aluminum industry. That's where that trade-off begins to occur. And I think as you move forward in the next 5 years, you're going to see more and more. And how you factor this in, very well, okay? How you factor this in is unclear to me, because I think it makes for a very, very distasteful and very difficult conversation to have. We have to figure out how we can manage that without forcing the trade-offs that we want in the environmental agreement.
President Obama issued a presidential memorandum moving forward in directing the EPA had earlier put out a proposed rule on new sources. They pulled it back. They came back out in September under Section 111D. Just recently in September, it issued a draft rule under Section 111D setting a new source performance standard of 1,000 pounds of an emission rate, a carbon emission rate for new coal sources and combined cycles, and it went on to deal with some other electric generating units too. So what's before us right now is that's for new sources. Now the job will roll. EPA is to develop a guidelines document under Section 111D that where the ball rolls to the states in large part, to be able to then give guidance to the states on how to make those standards that were set for new units applicable to existing sources. States have a lot of flexibility in this, and I think Dr. Peters can chime in here. But as we're looking forward, is how do these new source performance standards, how will they relate to existing sources? The time frame on this is very. The presidential memorandum wants EPA to put out a rule in this next June. It's going to be a significant rulemaking. You certainly see certain states, California, the states that have greenhouse gas protocols, working EPA to make sure that those have some equivalency in the new rules. You see other states working in different ways. But this is a major rulemaking that's going to be taking form over the next year.
And again, I think we've already heard it said that's worthy of discussion with this group and future agenda on the stance TVA might, the advice that this group might give the board on the stance TVA might take. Are there any other environmental considerations that bear conversation? Steve?
Well, this is related to this. It is easy in a venue like this to get very focused on, and rightfully so, because it's important. I'm not mentioning the economic impact of rates, and then the relationship between the impacts of regulations and rates and this, that, and the other. And it tends to be a certain mindset that takes hold. For a number of us, and I think for a number of people within the scientific community, the impact of not aggressively addressing climate change, the economic impact of not aggressively addressing climate change, and the ripples that it sends through our economy and the implications that it has in people's lives and the disruptions as we disrupt the climate is very significant. And so I think it's important to have a context of which discussions like this are happening, and not to lose that context, because a number of us believe that this is one of the most significant challenges facing humanity relative to what we're doing in disrupting the climate. And now we're beginning to see more and more how that is beginning to unfold. And for those of us who have children and grandchildren like myself, you know, it is an issue that we have to address. And so it's easy to take the conversations we just had out of context, but I think that hopefully this distinguished body can keep that context in the conversation, because these rules are coming for a reason, and we need to then be as creative and innovative and as flexible to apply them, as opposed to just trying to look at them only in a negative light.
The imperative will always maintain around ensuring reliability. Boyd, to your point, that would never go away. Declining demand and the pressure that puts on TVA's model to ensure rate competitiveness in the face of declining demand, ensuring competitive rates, and then the environmental regulation that we just had some dialogue about. So a lot of good input on some things that will ultimately, no doubt, appear on a future agenda, I would imagine. And so maybe I'll conclude with the graphic that Joe almost led with. And again, this is Bill Johnson's graphic that he uses to describe the fragility of TVA's model. Maybe I'll conclude with sort of summarizing that we talked about the challenges around the new grid and the really fundamentally different model that the electric utility is illustrating, and entering with some of the more robust demand side alternatives in front of TVA. And so we've talked about we need to address the issue around fairness and cross-subsidization and how to address that, perhaps some differences in the public power model, and how might that influence TVA's reaction to that new dynamic in the industry of the much more robust demand side alternatives. All the while making sure that the economics that are the economies that are being supported by that grid are understood, and that we understand the impact on that. We talked about some of those demand side alternatives around self-generation and net metering are probably worthy of discussion to see if there's some advice that this group might want to give the board on that. Influencing customer behaviors as part of that demand side issue probably needs to be a subject of discussion. As we look at some of these other issues, the future of the coal fleet, well, no doubt, as we talk about ensuring reliability, the future of the coal fleet, that's also got environmental concerns and considerations that need to be addressed. That no doubt will be a subject of discussion. And quite frankly, just maintaining the sustainable TVA model represented by that box, given all of the dynamics you just saw on those 5 slides: declining demand, deteriorating rate performance, which could lead to a death spiral for any jurisdiction. Certainly, the economic development concerns that have been addressed here need to be a key part of the discussion. That's a key part of TVA's mission. And again, the challenge that TVA has, we try to summarize in the 5 slides here, is a picture of declining demand, more and more demand side alternatives that stress the model, and deteriorating rate performance. And so when we think about the resource portfolio, these need to be front and center, one might suggest, in the discussions we have going forward, and they probably will be. So with that, I'll conclude by, we asked just some questions I think we sort of touched on each 4 axes or 4 sides of this box. But are there any other comments, perhaps that these questions might tee up that anybody else might like to throw on the table for future discussion? And if not, in the future, maybe even submit to Joe, so you can have the opportunity to think about it. Hey, here's some stuff that we might want to discuss in future meetings. So with that, Wes, I'm sorry to hit your hand up.
Yeah, it's easy to talk about energy efficiency and demand response as an important thing, but it's sort of like a fruitcake. There's a lot of pieces in there. I don't know if that's something for this group or other groups or someone else, but to prioritize those. I don't know that we can do 20 to 40 energy efficiency initiatives well. I don't know that we can do 10 different DR programs well. What are the biggest bang for the buck? What are the most important EE and DR initiatives, specific technologies that matter the most, so we can be more laser focused on that, and then just putting a big bandage on that says EEDR.
Right. Great point. Developing priorities around some of these things, and I need to be broader than EEDR that might need to be prioritized, but that's a great point.
So, first of all, let me just say thank you. I know in these meetings that they're long. But for me anyway, this was a very productive conversation and very interesting, and I think very useful in helping us shape some of our thinking that we need to go forward. The other thing I will say is that when we talk internally amongst ourselves about some of the issues, a lot of what was said here today are the kinds of things we're talking about. There's a few things that while not a surprise, I think you help us think about and focus on well, and I appreciate that. But it does confirm to me that the challenges that we have going ahead, I think everyone recognizes, and that the solutions are not going to be easy, which is going to be kind of the challenge for this group and a challenge for TVA and all of the local power companies, and how we continue to provide that value back to all of the consumers over the years. So with that in mind, as I said at the beginning, we weren't going to have too many meetings, but we do have some fairly significant issues we need to address. And Gary, of course, I have to take a 2-second aside here, but so my job is to make sure Gary has his cost and a schedule for his project and then he stays on it, right? So he's working on that, but then he points out to me that folks like you and the interaction messes up his schedule if we don't keep on track. So part of the dates that we need for some of these meetings is also to help keep Gary on track for the things that he needs to do. So Beth has proposed a date of January 22nd, 23rd for the next meeting. I believe that's a Wednesday and a Thursday. And we don't have the location fully decided yet, but what I have here is we're thinking about Knoxville or Chattanooga. If you all can either let us know today before you leave, or if we can send me an email shortly, we'll be able to lock that down. Okay, Wes is.
Are you thinking the evening of the 22nd and meeting the day of the 23rd?
I'm actually thinking probably a little bit more than that. Today's meeting was actually a little bit abbreviated based on what we normally do. The presentations, for example, that you got today, we normally do on the first day. Then we have kind of a social evening so that folks can talk about the material and give you all an opportunity to interact. And then usually the second day, we really get into the discussion and building of the advice and we go back to the board. So when you count travel time, it's usually